Chapter 5. Between Silk and Leather. Days taught bodies, evenings taught masks. The trouble was not in wearing two, it was in the look each drew from the man at her left. Rif could take a blow and call it instruction. Seren could take a glance and call it mercy. Between them lived a small, impolite ache that had learned to be uncomfortable for the chest they shared. She changed in the little room off the outer court where even servants do not go without permission. Leather remembered mud on the peg. Silk waited on the chair like a well-trained roomer. The silk knew her as well as the leather now, the way a dog knows to lie quietly when boots are being pulled on for the road. She pinned her hair with the precision of a woman who has learned that a single crookedness becomes a conversation. Paint made her into a different story by small degrees. Silk gloves hid bruised knuckles. A fan, handled correctly, becomes a wall. In the yard, Marius measured distance like a surveyor, 1 pace back from her line, voice even, eyes counting the world. In the hall, his hand would hover at Seren's elbow with a confidence it never offered Rif's gauntlet. The same knee under the table meant different things depending on which name she wore. She told herself it was useful and proper. She told herself she preferred it this way. The telling did not always listen. She took her seat at Marius's left, as if sitting had never been work. The hall saw Seren, the yard had eyed Rif. It amused her indecently that men she had taken to the ground at noon now bowed correctly to the princess at dusk. It stung her too that her husband's smile for Seren carried warmth like a lamp, while his eyes for Rife in daylight carried a careful distance that honoured her edge and would never soften it in public. Jealousy, ridiculous as weather resentful of its own reign, rose and fell. She let it pass through and did not pretend it was something else. On nights when the yard had been ugly and her cheeks wore proof under powder, she skipped the ceremony and wrote apologies in a neat hand to the court's secretary. Spirits made their own weather in the skin. She learned which bruises enjoyed being hidden and which enjoyed being left alone. Most nights a fan and gloves did the trick. One evening when a bruise hidden in cloth made particular trouble, a cool breeze came from nowhere and made it better. No one noticed except her. She noticed and put her palm under the table against his knee and said, "Thank you," without moving her mouth. The court learned to keep better hours under their joint patience. The army learned to stand where the ground needed it. The weather did what weather does. It prepared. And in the quiet between those labours, a clerk with storms in his fingers earned the friendship of men who feed armies and move them, while a knight with new bruises earned the right to wear 2 names and be believed under both. West did not hurry. West would come when West was ready. In the meantime, the South remembered how to have many hands on one rope and how to pull in the same direction without needing a drum to tell it when. Chapter 6. Sharks in the Ledgers. The sharks were not only in the sea, they lived in the ledgers too. Marius took their measure the way he took weather, by the pressure change before the storm and the places where the air refused to be honest. Coin had been siphoned from boots into banners, from grain into gardens, from spirits and scalpel blades into side doors with polite guards. 4 names surfaced again and again: cavalry, archers, pikemen, supply. 4 lords, each with a seal that had learned to lie. He did not make a spectacle of it. He went early and stayed late where loaves were counted and barrels chalked. He let the numbers talk, then listened to cooks, teamsters, quartermasters, and clerks. When the book sat like a trap, ready to snap shut, he brought it to his father and said, "Here." King Katarin, who had learned to hate the smell of spoiled honour, said only, "Now." Arrests came like weather, sudden and precise. No one was killed. No one was allowed to be a martyr. The cells filled. The court prepared. "What will you do with 4 orphaned commands?" Katarin asked Rif. "Empty chairs invite stupid men to sit." "Fill them," Rif said. "From the ranks, loyalty to land, not to a person." She named a pike sergeant who sold an heirloom to buy boots for his men, an archer captain who refused a bribe and taught boys to mend bowstrings, and a supply officer who fed 3 regiments in a flood and kept clean books. "And cavalry?" Catherine asked. "Lord Corin Hale," Rife said. 4th-generation soldier. Honest with pain. Pride is sharp, but leashable by work. He loves the line-holding. Make him Grand General. Marius did not argue. He added what the numbers knew. Hale had not stolen. He had overpaid 2 widows and hidden it with clumsy receipts. "Done," Katarin said. He looked at Anlina. She inclined her head. "There will be a ceremony, enough witnesses to bind duty." The hall kept itself plain. The 4 new commanders stood where pride and terror look the same from the outside. Marius read, names, crimes, consequences, names, ranks, responsibilities. No theatre. "Archers," he said. The captain who had refused bribes stepped forward. "Pikemen." The sergeant did not bow too deep. "Supply." The woman glanced once at the tallyman by the side door and accepted the duty. "Cavalry," Marius said, and looked at Catherine. "The South appoints Lord Corin Hale to Grand General," the king said. "Serve the land." Hale came forward, knelt, rose. When given leave to speak, he did not boast. "I ask one thing from the crown." "Name it," Katarin said. "Rife of the Pass," Hale answered. "Promote her to my assistant. She will carry orders clean and argue them cleaner." A brief draft moved through the hall. Anlina's mouth eased. Katarin turned his head to Seren standing on the dais to his right. "Princess?" "Not for theatre, for consent." Seren inclined her fan the width of a breath. "Yes." "Teach her strategy," Catherine said. "The arithmetic that keeps boys alive." "Gladly," Hale said. "So be it," the king said. The clerk drew a line and wrote a name. The word assistant tasted like claim. Marius felt the small bruise of it and wondered, against his own sense, whether Ref found the old soldier more of a man than the lord who coaxed storms. The wondering shamed him. He folded it flat and turned it into gentleness, set Serene's cup where her hand would find it, let wind blow on her bruises, careful with his smile. He knew, even as he did it, that it would pull harder on Riff's 2 faces. He did it anyway. It was the only mercy allowed in public. Form required that the generals present themselves to the court. Seren was on the dais, silk serious, the fan a small wall. Hale bowed to the princess, took her gloved hand, and brushed it with his mouth. The glove hid most things, not all. Along the wrist, a sliver of bandage, tucked with a small signature knot he had tied 3 hours ago over a scrape from an over-eager bind. Through powder, the yellowing edge of a bruise on her arm made 2 images read as 1 coin. He looked up. The face under paint was the same one that had smiled without gloating when he knocked her into mud, the same eyes that never asked permission to stand. He kept the mask. The bow did not stumble. Only his eyes marked the map becoming a place. Riffa, Seren, allowed him 1 heartbeat. Then she tilted the fan a fraction. "Keep your manners." He understood. He straightened, made the correct angle to a princess, and folded the knowledge away. At her side, Marius felt the faint shiver in the air. He did not interfere and told his small jealousy to be ashamed elsewhere. After, when the hall had eaten its fill of whispers, the new command took oaths at the head of the steps. Hale's voice carried without shouting. He did not say the army belonged to him. He said it belonged to the ground, and to those who would be buried in it if they failed. Chapter 7. Sounding the line. He called her out in the hour when the yard's shadows are long enough to be mistaken for other men. "Wood," Hale said, tossing her a waster. "No curtsy, no flourish. Pull nothing." Rife nodded because her throat had decided to be too honest for words. She set her stance and made ready. He did not test. He attacked. The first crack along her wrists told her exactly how little mercy he had brought. She answered with the shortest line. The tight turn, the ugly parry, the small bite of a riposte that ends a rib. He took it without blinking and came harder, shrinking the space until she had to live elbow to hip to ankle or fall. She let his weight write a bad sentence and crossed it out with a step-through and a hilt shove that was all barroom, no ballad. Welts bloomed. She painted his wrist. He tapped her knee. Neither temper slipped. He tried to steal it on a corner, drove her toward casks to make them a second opponent. She refused the board by stepping into him instead of around, where there's no room for poetry, only accuracy. The bind met in the middle and ended nothing. They laughed once, more breath than joy, and broke. At the rail, Marius watched and learned how desire can sound like a drum. He wanted to name her aloud and be done with secrecy. He wanted to lay a hand on the post and say, for all to hear that the lady fighting so bravely is mine. Instead, he counted beats, swallowed the words, and held the shape of it behind his teeth because he had sworn not to crowd her life. When it was done, he went back to his duties and tried to forget, unsuccessfully. It was a draw, not out of tenderness, but because neither would lie to the lesson. He lowered first, she lowered a heartbeat later, refusing a victory that wasn't there. The yard breathed out. They sat with backs to the cool wall, boots flat, eyes bright with the mean pleasure of earned bruises. Spirits bit the cut in her hairline and told it to behave. He pressed a rag to his thigh, welt, with the dignity of a man reconciled to learning from pain every day until he dies. "What did you lie about?" he asked, when the heat had finished talking for both of them. "Nothing." She did not let silence conspire this time. "I omitted what wasn't the yard's business. I was Riff of the Pass much longer than I have been Seren of the East. I am Riff here. Keep it in your own head and nowhere else." He weighed it like a tool. "I'll keep it. I said assistant for the yard. I'll keep that word too." "Good," she said, and some stiffness left her shoulders. "You'll teach me the rest." "The rest?" His eyebrow made a small, dangerous joke. "The business beyond bruises. What keeps boys from dying for the wrong reason? Maps, lines, when to starve a fight and when to feed it. Where to place a quiet order so 2 hours later it looks like a miracle." He stood slowly. His welt had opinions, and jerked his chin toward the mess. "If you can bend over a table after that, you're fit to learn." They took the far end, where drafts behave, and pushed bowls aside. He emptied a small sack of tokens, beans, bone buttons, a few flat stones filched from the yard because they felt like riverbeds. "This," he said, setting a stone where her hand could feel it, "is the pass." 2 buttons flicked to either end, roads that pretend to be one road until the weather corrects them. He drew with chalk without apology for the table. "Supply moves like a patient animal. Men move like impatient ones. Your job is to make the second behave like the first when you can. Put scouts where boredom would teach them to lie unless you give them something to count. Don't trust a straight line. Don't let victory outrun bread. And every clever arrow, ask whether you're feeding pride or saving a child, a father." She didn't nod. Nods make teachers perform. She put 2 fingers on a button that stood for horse. "What does Marius do to your arrows?" "For me, nothing. For you, I suspect, weather will do what you ask of it," Hale said, letting a smile threaten and then think better of it. "Be a fog, or an inconvenient crosswind, if you are willing to put your weather in harm's way." "Good," she said. "I am not, but I do not always get the last say." He set a bean apart. "This is the thing you never plan for that proves whether the plan was worthy. A lord's cousin in the wrong brigade. A flood people swear can't come until spring. Keep a handful. Needing too many is a shame. Allowing none is a cruelty." She moved pieces. He corrected her twice without rancor. She told him where a bar fight shifts when the table is kicked right, which part of a crowd panics last, and can be made into a wall if you don't shout. He listened the way men listen to new weapons and to daughters learning to walk. When she shifted a line a single degree to bring a small village inside a sweep of safety at the cost of 2 hours, he began to object, then looked at his sergeant and remembered a bloodied girl in a ransacked village who had picked up a sword and marched with the army. "Fine," he said. 2 hours. "Thank you," she said as if he'd handed her a spoon. The quiet game of war lasted an hour. Men came and went, took bread, left bowls, glanced over and saw nothing but tokens and 2 people arguing with their hands. At the end, when chalk lay spent like a picked bone, he tapped the stone that had been the pass. "I'd have you for this," he said. "Not because you're good with a sword, because you don't forget the fight is for life, not glory." "Then I'll be worth the spirits we used today," she said, and he snorted, knowing exactly what the wound on her head had cost, and that she'd paid extra in pride for having been a breath slow. They rose into the yard's evening shape. The bandage that had been peeking under her glove had come loose. Without thinking, he tucked the corner back with the same neat knot as before, like straightening a picture because living with it crooked would insult the day. He didn't look at her face. "First light," he said. "First light," she answered. Marius came to stand beside her. The backs of their hands brushed, his finger hooked hers. He wished he were brave enough to touch her, as the man who had just walked away had, and he knew in his heart that no amount of tenderness to Seren would let him lay claim to Rif. Outside, the west rolled its shoulders and kept its weather. Inside, maps remembered they served people, and the yard kept the hour it was owed. Hearts, less disciplined, tried to live with the lies they had invited to share their beds. Chapter 8. Threadbare Truths. Palaces are like old men. They keep their jokes in the corners and tell their truths in the threadbare places. Marius noticed one in the great hall, passing through when it was almost empty. The braziers had been banked, benches stood on their sides like sleeping oxen. 2 servants were lifting the last of the trenchers. Along the long wall, a tapestry the length of a dining table showed a rider breaking from a line. No flourish, only purpose. The weave had remembered wind in pennons, and mud under hooves with an indecency that felt like honesty. The armour on the figure was wrong in a way that made his mouth go thoughtful. Not wrong for war. Wrong for the men who think war is theirs. He stood there long enough for habit to become intention, and that was when a voice with steel filed flat for tenderness found him. "You've a good eye for broken patterns," said the former queen, his grandmother, as if she were remarking on the weather over bread. She was smaller than his memory and larger than anyone's fear, and the years had left her with the sort of poise that makes doors open even when hands are busy. "Whose?" he asked, which was really what? "Mine, once, by law," she said, then shook her head at her own joke. "Not the tapestry, the title, and what went with it, the sword and the armour. The armour belongs to the commander. It is waiting for one willing to wear it again." Her mouth did a tidy, amused thing. "I have seen it exactly once, when the title was handed to me, and I handed it on again to the proper person in due time, though your mother had little patience for me. Come." He went because boys obey grandmothers, and kings worth anything take instruction from those who kept houses before they were born. They left the quieting hall and passed through rooms that remembered councils and into one that did not. The armory visited by ceremony is full of lieutenants and Polish. This one was neither. The air was cool in the way of places that do not forgive damp. The armour waited as if it had chosen to on its stand. Not a relic, not a costume, a presence. It gleamed without being foolish about it, light lying along it like a hand. The lines were clean and without desperation. The curves did not apologise for existing. Marius realised, with that deep uselessness that is love for a thing well made, that he had been missing this without knowing its name. He stepped closer and felt it before he touched it. The hum, not a sound. An absence, like a room where someone has stopped playing a violin and the air is relieved. He reached out and laid 2 fingers along the edge of the gorget. The sensation arrived up his arm in a ripple his body recognized. Magic did not gather to it. It sat down. "It quiets magic," he said aloud before he had given his mouth permission. The former queen nodded. "We called it other things," she said mildly. "Blessing, curse, good sense in metal. We stopped calling it anything when it behaved." She reached past him to a shelf and took down a scroll that had not been important often enough to become vain. Inside, a steady hand had written the words straight. "I was made for a day when no man can save the kingdom and have served already. I will serve again, the day a worthy commander is called forth." The queen laughed, not cruelly. "You should have seen the crop of peacocks who have come to measure themselves against that sentence. They all left in their shirts. Armor that will not be lied to is a public service." Marius looked. Not as a prince, not as a magician with weather under his tongue. As a man who had learned to count what matters. The breast was cut, where a flat plate would be a cruelty. The waist did not pretend bone is a straight line. The shoulder pieces pivoted where they should, so that reaching did not punish. The inside edge of the vambrace had been burred once and smoothed again, as if a woman had taken it to a file herself for the sake of a wrist that did not wish to bleed unnecessarily. "No man," he echoed, and the words did not sting. They were not an insult. They were a map. She wore it. "She did," the queen said, "2 of them even. It has served the one it was made for and one other." She tipped her head toward the stand. "If you are very quiet, you can hear the malice it does not have." He did not laugh. He did hear it. The refusal to be grand, the habit of allowing other things to be themselves in its presence. He thought of a girl who had caught lightning and flame in her hands and turned them into an apology. He thought of a yard and a fan, of a bruise written under powder and a knot tucked at a wrist with a soldier's pride. "Take the current commander to see it," the queen said, voice gone practical, which in her mouth meant kind. "Soon, things that belong together should be introduced at their convenience, not yours." He nodded because defiance would have been childish. "Soon," he said, dutiful, and meant it for the queen, and also meant not yet for himself. The stand was quietly loosened, the straps padded with linen that would not stain. A cedar-lined chest, a discreet lock, a carter who did not creak. Enough. He labelled the crate with a harmless lie. Spare fittings for weather scaffolding. Fragile. Do not stack. He did not tell Rife because to tell her would be to put a yoke on the thing she was becoming. The armor did not want that. Neither did he. On the way back past the great hall, he paused again. The rider in the threads did not turn her head. He straightened the edge where a boy had tugged it crooked and felt better for having done the small, respectful thing available to him. He found the former queen at a window listening to a courtyard behave itself. "Thank you," he said, and she accepted the gratitude like bread left, where it will be found later by whoever needs it. "You will carry it west," she said, as if remarking on rain. "I will keep it dry," he said, and that was a promise he could fold into a day's work. That evening, at court, Marius stood to dance with his wife. He wrapped his arm around her waist and let himself imagine, amongst the motion, leather and plate under his hand. Riff dancing with him in the armor's quiet instead of Seren pinned into silk. The thought landed like hunger. He wanted, with a sudden and unkingly desperation, to join the 2 halves of her life into one. Fan and gauntlet, crown and gorget, one chair, one wife. He held the wanting still until it stopped making noise. Her fingers laced into hers, where his hand sat, and pried the hand gently looser. Heat told Marius that there too would be a fresh bruise. He let the cold breeze form in his palm and meekly accepted a kiss on the cheek in thanks when the dance ended. In the armory room the cedar waited, ignorant and pleased with itself. The armor stood inside its own quiet. It did not dream. Iron is not sentimental, but if it had, it might have recognized the shape of a girl with two names stepping toward a day that needed both.